Some of you may want to make sure you're sitting down for this one, because it's probably going to be one of my most controversial takes. I don't think that hearing bigoted or extremist speech is a bad thing. I think it's important to hear from them. I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather a bigot was open about them being a bigot than slyly keeping quiet and not saying anything and retreating to the dark corners of the internet, festering. They are then free to go completely unchallenged and even become more vengeful and even more bigoted, which is not a good thing. Whilst I have absolutely no idea that this person is a bigot. But there's another reason why I believe in this. Both the right and the left want to embolden the extremists on their side, while silencing the extremists on their opposition. Well, I don't like extremists from either side. I have no time for racial or religious segregationists, misogynists or misandrists, or the people who think it's acceptable to go looting and rioting and smashing up people's houses and looting businesses and attacking people in the streets for their political opinions. I would actually prefer to have more speech of all kinds, and I'll explain why. Perhaps the best example of freedom of speech working is what happened to the British National Party in the UK. We're going back to the late 2000s, which, unlike UKIP at the time, which was a somewhat respectable mainstream party, the British National Party was a racist party led by a rather vile, disgusting character called Nick Griffin. And for a very long time, the BNP was doing quite well. And this was mainly due to anxieties and frustrations around mass immigration, which started under Princess Tony Blair, along with the rapidly changing communities and also to an extent the relatives of grooming gang victims. Cousins, fathers, brothers, seeing their sisters or daughters or nieces, cousins or even friends being victims of these gangs and no justice being given, and in many times just being ignored or covered up or the victims being blamed. Lots of people started voting BNP. I don't think most of these people were racists or bigots. I think that they were just voting out of anxiety and frustration and desperation. But at the same time, there were a sizable amount of racists in that party. Literal racists. People who openly believed in the 14 words, wanted this country to remain white British only and even just European only. So this is what happened. Once the media embargo was lifted off of the leader of the BNP, Mr. Griffin appeared on BBC's Question Time for 1 hour. This was at arguably the height of the BNP support. This is where the BNP was actually in local councils. They had successfully stood for election and won in some local councils, which is not a particularly pleasant or proud moment in British political history, or British history overall for that matter. But the day he appeared on Question Time, the BBC was criticised mercilessly for this. This guy's hate speech, he's bigoted, he's a racist, how dare you give this guy a platform? What anyone with any common sense or brains would have been able to predict was that the BNP support evaporated after this appearance. The BNP had lost all of their council seats. They managed to get 560,000 votes, but they won absolutely 0 seats. They lost all of their local council representation and their voter base evaporated. Once people saw what this man and his party stood for, they stopped voting for that party. Fast forward to today, and the British National Party is no longer a force in British politics, and rightfully so. And this is why I firmly believe it is not only important to give platforms to ordinary speech, it's important to give platforms to all speech, regardless of how offensive it may be. Sunlight, after all, is the best disinfectant, and the best way to deal with extremists, or just deal with people that you do not agree with, is the full glare of the spotlight. And that applies to people who are not extremists as well. You should have the confidence in your own views and frankly the fortitude and courage to believe that you can beat them in a fair and open marketplace of ideas. Which is exactly what happened to Mr. Griffin. Once the full glare of the spotlight was shone upon him, his voter base collapsed and, well, where is he now? He is an absolute laughingstock. And when you truly sit down and listen to an extremist, most of them might as well be comedians with some of the crap that comes out of their mouth. Particularly religious extremists. They're the funniest. I would also like to quickly mention that a common trope with extremists, and dictators for that matter, is they tend to ban free speech and they ban criticism and comedy. They're not a fan of having the piss taken out of them. or being laughed at for that matter. The best way you could damage them is let them have a platform and then laugh in their face.